we're kind of going against this idea that we shouldn't be living life. Like, we should be living life vigorously.
I picked up a microphone and decided I want to be the podcast host that makes you think and has you feeling like you belong somewhere. Welcome to another edition of Vigorously with me, Val Kleinhands. Comedian Aaron Foster is here. I love the fact that you've been doing some funny videos lately. I've been catching up on all of it. Welcome, sir. I'm thrilled to have you.
Hello, thanks for having me, Val. I appreciate it. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, of course. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you haven't done comedy all that long, but you would have fooled me with the videos that I watched.
Well, that's good to hear. I've done it a long time in my head. Does that count? What does that count?
Yeah, that counts.
Yeah, well, so I did stand up. I lived in LA back 2005 to 2004 to 2009, and I did it for about a year at the end there, which is not very long. And then I stopped and I started again just about 2 years ago. So yeah, in the big picture, definitely not very long, but it's something I've wanted to do kind of my whole life, and have really kind of jumped back in full steam in the last couple of years. Sort of post COVID, I came out of COVID inspired to, like, life is short, got to do what you want to do, and sort of that's how I ended up back in that game. Yeah.
Okay, got it. That's the catalyst. So, when did the comedy bug originally bite? Was it growing up watching comedians, or you had favorite ones? You were inspired?
I very much, yeah, started at a young age. I used to watch this show that was on in the 80s called Evening at the Improv, which was like a half-hour show. There'd be 4 or 5 comics on doing kind of short sets. And there was something about it, like one person and a microphone and no editing, no, just like kind of very independent, and people, speaking their mind, saying whatever they wanted to say, which I was both inspired and terrified by. I mean, I was the shy, quiet kid in school that never wanted to get in front of the class or do anything like that. But at the same time, there was something about the sort of, I don't know if power is the right word, but just the confidence of these people that were kind of speaking their truth, that was very admirable in a way. And then every once in a while, they'd be like, "Oh, I had an idea like that once, but like I didn't know you could say it out loud." Um, and then a certain, sort of eventually come to realize, like, if you make it funny, you could say anything out loud. So that's been a big part of what's brought me to it over the years. Yeah.
Well, again, you could have fooled me because in my head, I was thinking definitely class clown growing up. Definitely was a little bit of a maybe a prankster, but no, it's more Chandler Bing. Can I offer you a sarcastic comment instead? Give you
Yeah,
the
and I
back
think
quote.
similar to that character, it's born out of sort of, family issues and personal insecurities, and I hope you like it if I can say something funny and things like that. And I mean, I definitely was not the class clown unless maybe you sat right next to me, and sort of
Okay.
whispering under my breath, like, but I was so afraid of this thing that I really wanted to say that I thought was probably funny, but if it wasn't, I wouldn't say it, because like the fear of, uh having a bad audience reaction would just keep me quiet. So sort of fear of failure and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Or is it fear of being labeled the asshole? That usually stops me. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do. I don't want to be the inappropriate person right now. So
Yeah,
maybe.
I think any matter of like calling attention to myself in a negative way was not worth what the positive payoff might be, especially when I was younger. And as I've gotten older, I've gotten over that to a certain extent, and understand, like, people are going to think what they think, and 5 minutes later they're not going to remember it anyway, even if you do make a fool of yourself. But there's a lot of that sort of fear of failure that sort of motivates me to work hard, I guess.
In today's internet, no, we don't know how that works.
Yeah.
Well, so to me, I've always felt like there's certain specific things that make a joke funny. There's certain things that are just unanimously funny, and they always have an element of the truth to them. I think that's why Bill Burr is funny. I think that's why Eddie Murphy's funny. Just the icons. Would you agree with that? What do you think it takes to make a joke or a bit funny?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, right? And I think for me, truth is definitely a big part of it. Absolutely. And that's, what I do with my comedy. I think there are comics who don't do that, who are still brilliant. Somebody like Anthony Jeselnik, who is just a brilliant joke writer. Dark. You cannot get darker
Yes.
than Anthony Jeselnik. But nothing he says is true. It's still hilarious. But for me and for the comics that I really like, yeah, that's a huge part of it. And you know, you need something that's unexpected, some kind of a turn. But I think ultimately the way I was sort of taught and the way I write is to just start with something that's true. You know,
Mhm.
what we would call what's the premise of that joke that like has to be rooted in some truth, and then you kind of go off from there, you know.
Yeah, it's the foundation. It's what makes it's I think what makes things relatable to your audience. I mean, like who hasn't heard that story before? Who hasn't felt that way before? And Anthony, I love Anthony because for me, he's a hometown guy. We went to the same high school in Pittsburgh,
Oh
so
wow, okay.
I completely understand this dark, like sardonic humor coming from him. But
Yeah,
he was like I think he's 5 years older than me. So we never really crossed paths, but we
sure.
almost did. But no, so totally understand where that dark sense of humor comes from, and I'm a fan of him for sure too. Do you
Yeah.
look up to any other comedians that are active today?
I do, yeah. I have kind of a batch of really my favorites. I'd say in no particular order. I mean Mark Maron, Gary
Yeah.
Goldman, who I think Gary Goldman is the best joke writer living. Mike Birbiglia, I'm a huge fan of. This sort of storytelling, but stand-up based, and you know these are all very honest kind of people. Maria Bamford and Taylor Tomlinson, Neil
Yes.
Brennan, and Tig Notaro. That's kind of I think that's six or seven. I have seen almost all of them live. I've gone to New York twice to see Birbiglia on Broadway. You know,
Oh,
I've seen Gary Goldman a couple times. Seen Maria Bamford. Where I see Maria Bamford in Denver. Um, yeah, just those people. I think they're so unique and have such a great perspective. And again, it's that kind of like, oh, you could say that on stage. I didn't realize that. Uh, because they're all very, very honest about their lives and you know health issues or mental health issues and things like that. And
right.
I'm not certainly. I mean, I mean, you can't copy their acts. I do talk about some of that same stuff that and how it affects you know how I've had those experiences as well. That sort of again that permission to talk about that kind of thing that I'm not great at talking about in a regular conversation, you know, even with my therapist, but for some reason on stage, if I can hopefully make it funny, it gives a little more permission. And you know, those kind of people did something for me. And it started earlier when I was young from watching comics and movies of just that you identify it and you feel a little bit more seen and a little bit less alone.
Mhm.
And there's something about that. Somewhere I got this idea like, oh, well, maybe I could do that for somebody someday, you know, that same kind of. So that's empowered me, I guess, to talk about some of the stuff that I talk about, which is my mental health and depression and anxiety and some issues in my family and stuff like that. So
Right, I was just going to get into that because when you mentioned Berbiglia, that's almost his entire bit. It's connecting
it really
his,
is.
which, but that's why he's one of my favorites too. I mean, there's millions of Americans that know what it's like to have anxiety. They know what it's like to have depression, OCD, anything
Yeah.
similar. They know what it's like. So when they hear Mike tell his stories about his experiences with those things, you're right. We feel a little less alone. You do the same thing. How do you do that in a way that is tactful and not tacky? Because it's a tough subject.
Yeah, it can be, and it's a good question, and it's kind of trial and error. I'm really fortunate that I have a group, like a writers group of comics that I work with, kind of on and off. It's a group that's been around a long time, and it's people that have, you know, done late night spots and write for TV shows, and lots of very established people that sort of come and go. And so I'm lucky that like that's sort of my open mic audience rather than you know the bar on Wednesday night with nine guys and you can't really get a great response to. So as sort of you know overused as the term has been, it's I have a very safe space to kind of try stuff out and um, test the waters with that stuff for myself and for others because I you know I have a um, I mean for me in depression, I mean this is you know I like it's not great, but in my family, it's kind of like winning the lottery, right? Like I have a bipolar father, I have a schizophrenic brother, and you know, I have a vegan uncle. So like, you know, I dodged some bullets, right? Like, um, so, but to talk about that stuff is yeah, it can be tricky. It's trial and error, and you know, I have a big chunk about I mean, spoiler alert about my brother committing suicide that, you know, when I first started doing that, did not go well, you know. Took over a year of kind of trying to figure it out and get the audience to a place where they know that I'm okay and that they feel comfortable laughing at it. And that certainly doesn't work for everybody, even now. So it's I wouldn't say my stuff is controversial, but not everybody digs it when I do some of that darker stuff. But now that I'm doing hour plus long shows, it works a lot better than trying to do that in a 6 minute set on a Thursday night with a bunch of people that just want to have a drink and forget their jobs for a couple hours. And like,
Right.
they want, like, I thought we are gonna get, dick jokes and crowd work, and this guy's, it's like, so I've gotten a little bit more astute at, like, all right, let's maybe not do that tonight.
Let's be a little bit more mindful tonight. No, yeah, you have to be able to read a room, I would imagine, which is something that I'm terrible at. So I couldn't. I give any comedian credit for just having the balls to go up there and honestly do it and just trial and error and see what happens. But it sounds like you sort of have your own built-in focus group, so to speak, with the writers and anybody else that you work on. You get to test some of that material out beforehand with them.
I get to test it out, and it's not foolproof by any means. But usually it's sort of, you can get it to the point where, like, okay, I know this isn't going to fall completely flat. It might not have people falling out of their seats necessarily. And, a bunch of comedy writers is a very specific audience that is wired in a certain way, where, again, like some of these jokes about suicide, they're like, oh my God, those are so great. They're so dark. They're the best. You got to do them. I'm like, I got to do them in a 5 minute set tomorrow night at, the Comedy Store. I'm not sure that's a good idea. And it wasn't a good idea.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a comic, another comic I really like. Sort of, she's not new, but she's sort of new on the national scene. Erica Rhodes. She just was on America's Got Talent.
I've been hearing about her.
Yeah, she's very, very funny. She does some dark stuff about her father and passing away and things like that. And we got into I tweeted something, and I don't really tweet, but I responded to something that she posted about bombing, and I posted something about bombing, and she's like, "Oh, the first like 2 or 3 years of stand-up is all bombing." I was like, "Oh boy, that's not good news." But
Has that been your experience or no?
not really. I mean, it certainly happens. But again, like I said, I'm fortunate to have this great sort of filter to put things through. I mean, I have had great shows, and I've had shows that are like, yeah, that was all right. But I like my material and I feel good about it. And sometimes it's just not your crowd, or it's just not your night. I mean, literally one of my favorite comics, and I think it's Maria Bamford. I mean, I have heard Stephen Colbert, Mark Maron, Mike Birbiglia, Neil Brennan, Pete Holmes, and probably some others. Her name comes up in their podcasts, and their response is always the same. Oh, she's the best. She's a genius. Nobody does it what she does. She's amazing. And she just has a book that just came out. So she made the rounds of all these podcasts I listened to, and she was telling a story about, like, essentially getting booed off stage like last year
Oh
because
wow.
not her crowd. She's a very unique human being and a very unique comic, and she's not for everybody. But so it's like, oh yeah, that still happens to everybody at some point if the people aren't your people or whatever. So yeah, I think the once I have established material that I have done successfully over a number of times, then if it doesn't work, it's like, nah, I think that's on you guys.
Got it.
A woman that's sort of a mentor of this group, Heather Pasternak, who now has a residency out in Vegas. I'm going to do her show tomorrow out at the Jimmy Kimmel Club there.
Fun.
And she did Colbert. She did a spot on Colbert, a few years back. And she says, if the audience isn't getting it, if she's having an off night or whatever, she says, I just do my Tonight Show set. And if they don't laugh at that, I'm like, well, that's, come on. I know that's a good set, so it's not always on you, but that doesn't necessarily make it feel that much better.
Yeah. So what keeps you going when you hit those moments? Is it just knowing that you've got different material and you still have another chance to try it out? What keeps you motivated to keep going up there?
Yeah, I think, when it works, I mean, there's nothing like it when it works. And it's just such an amazing feeling to, have this idea. And then, I mean, that's the thing about stand-up, right? You can find out that night if it works, if people like it, if people think it's funny, as opposed to writing or, making a short film or whatever that might take weeks or months or years even, before it comes out, before you get any feedback on a thing, on your performance or whatever. So it's very immediate, and you can always try the next night. And I try to remember those really particularly great shows and kind of because they're not all going to be like that. So it's like, all right, let me remember this one for the next time I'm kind of feel like I'm drowning here, and we'll try again tomorrow, you know.
Yeah. Keep going. Just positive attitude. I am a film buff, so I appreciated the little reel that I was watching the other day about Raiders of the Lost Ark and the plot hole. And that but I just want to compare the theories that we have, because my theory with that movie, the thing that always got me hung up was the U-boat. And how in the world did Indy travel that far on the U-boat? That's the thing that
Sure.
always got me. Is that the theory that we're talking about here? What's your theory?
That is not my problem with the movie. Now, before
Oh,
I
okay.
say anything, great movie. I love it. It's not like
Yeah.
it doesn't ruin the movie for me. Where sometimes plot holes do sort of cause bigger problems. But this is, had seen it probably, 30 times before I was pretty ingrained, and it's great childhood memory. And, I mean, I saw it in the theater. I'm an old guy. All right, so how short of a version I can give of this. So the Ark of the Covenant, right? The most powerful weapon
Mhm.
known to man, as Marcus Brody tells us, right? The army that carries the Ark before us would be invincible. People have been looking for this thing for thousands of years. Nobody's found it. Now Hitler and the Nazis are digging up
Right.
outside of Cairo. And then the way they find it, the staff of Ra, it's got the thing how it tells you how tall the staff is, but they only have the one side because Tote burned his hand, and they don't have the backside that says you take one back because of the Hebrew god, who's to honor the Hebrew god. Blah 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 blah. Indy finds it, been lost for a couple thousand years. They throw Marion in, they seal it up. How are we gonna get out? He knocks a hole in the wall that knocks out the side of a building that's just sitting in the desert, fully above ground and
That is a
exposed.
good point.
And like, you'd think any of these like German Nazi guys that were like, hey, maybe we should check out the building instead of just like digging in the sand randomly. It's such a small thing, and I do wonder. This is when I used to be when in acting school in LA, there was like, well, what's your elevator pitch? Like if you get on an elevator with Steven Spielberg, you got 20 seconds. Like, what's your pitch? I'm like, my
Oh my
pitch is,
god.
where the hell is his problem? Like, what happened? Does
What?
he know? Like, did you just write yourself into like, holy shit, how do we get this guy out of here? We'll have him knock a hole in the wall. But he's underground. Well, he doesn't have to be.
And the Hebrew element with the Nazis too. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Would they really be that invested in something that they supposedly hate? Like huh?
I don't know. I mean, somebody turned me on to, there's a whole Big Bang Theory episode about Ray.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
They said like if he never got involved, it would be the same ending, which is a whole other angle on it that I hadn't considered either. But you're underground in a room that people have been looking for 2,000 years, and then you knock a hole in the wall and you're no longer underground.
Hmm.
So
It's
it doesn't ruin
endless.
the movie for me. It's still a great movie.
Yeah. It's still on the list of greatest of all time. That definitely won't change. But we have questions. We still have
Yeah.
some questions.
I mean, you get into like whatever 4 and 5. That's a whole
Yeah.
other. Those
Oh god,
movies.
that's the Rocky series for me. I can't go past Rocky 4. I can't do it.
Yeah, I don't think
It
I ever went past 4.
it gets too ridiculous. The street fighting, really street fighting.
Was that where they went with that in the end?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah,
One of them, he had like a son that he trained or something, and then
right. That was I think 6. That was the newer one or something.
and then
I
the
mean,
latest Creed,
yeah,
right? With Apollo Creed's son.
right.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other. It's a whole other angle with Apollo Creed's son, and then you follow that journey. So it's kind of supposedly a different story. But I'm like, no, no. I just like, can we keep? Why do we do all these remakes when nothing was wrong with them in the first place? Nothing was wrong.
Yeah, and then just sequels and sequels. And I mean, IP,
Right.
that's the story of Hollywood these days, right? There's just like we have, I think, built-in fan base saves them
Yeah.
a lot of but it's the same, I see audition notices that are like must have at least 100,000 followers on social media,
Oh,
even to
really?
art. And it's like this is like a short film that pays $100. Like, come on,
Like,
you know.
sir, this is a
Um,
Wendy's. This is
but
not.
yeah. I mean, if you can get someone to do your marketing for you, I guess for free, why not? So, I don't know.
Jeez. I didn't know that that was even a requirement for some of
I
them.
mean, I don't see it a lot, but
Yeah.
I have seen it, and in comedy, it's certainly. I mean, any club you submit to or a festival or anything like that, there's always a like, what are your social media handles, how many followers, what platforms, all that kind of stuff. And
Mm.
I had a meeting a couple weeks ago with a, I don't know what you call it, like a comedy consultant, and it's a person that casts shows
Mhm.
and cast like TV shows, like super legitimate, very, very helpful, lots of contact information. You should do this, don't do that. And but ultimately the big takeaway that they had for me was like, you have to have more, you have to get at least 10,000 social media followers. Like it's just like that's the bottom line. That's the very first thing you have to do
Wow.
to sort of, start to get booked at clubs and things like that. And I get it, but it's drives me nuts also.
Well, because it's almost another full-time job, for crying out loud.
It is,
Trying
yeah.
to keep up with all that. I mean, I create content too, in addition to my day job at a hospital. And it's just like how anybody does any of that consistently. I understand why, like, we'll call them like the upper echelon, like the big celebrities, like they
Yeah.
have their own teams. Like they have their own teams that just like that's what they do. And I'm like, I can't imagine doing it any other way. So when you learn things like that and it's just like, this is exhausting, or this didn't work out at one time, how do you stay mentally healthy?
Well, I appreciate that you are assuming that I am mentally healthy. That's a
Start there.
stretch, but I appreciate it. Um, I mean, I've how do I say? So I mean, I have some systems in place that sometimes work and sometimes don't. Um, I do think a big part of it is really routine. As much as I think routine gets a bad habit of like, oh, that's a boring life. But that's how I get anything done, is a little bit at a time.
Yeah.
There's a quote that I just actually yesterday, I thought it was an Aristotle quote, but apparently it's not. It's some historian from the early 1900s in the US. You are what you repeatedly do, and then there's a follow-up to that. But essentially, like that's how you succeed at anything, right? An inch at a time. You can't go to the gym for 12 hours for 3 days and be in shape, right? You have to go for
Right.
half an hour for 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is. So there's that. There's just the routine and understanding that everything is sort of a game of inches. And then I sometimes will, sometimes when I'm really doing well and sometimes when I'm not doing well, I sort of have this point system for myself that I have. Sometimes it's 10 things, sometimes it's 5 things. It's kind of it varies from sort of like I'll do it for 3 or 4 months and then I won't do it for a while and I'll come back and do it.
Mm.
But it's sort of like if I just like, okay, I did 8 of those things today, and I track it. I track like a daily total and a weekly total and a running average for 7 and 14 days and all this kind of crazy analytical stuff that just it's just something to do, really. But and it's things like, getting good sleep, eating well, exercising, hanging out with my dog, being creative, meditating, being grateful, that kind of thing. It's just sort of this checklist of like, oh, I did 8 of those things today. All right, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
And
Got it.
then 7, and then that's a lot of 4s. That's a lot of 3s. I gotta
Ooh, something's not working.
sometimes
Yeah.
that will allow me to sort of catch myself before, because if it's down in like 1s and 2s, or if I've stopped keeping track, then it's usually too late, and then I'm usually like, yeah, I'm miserable. So what? I'm not getting out of bed. So I try not to
Mm.
let it go that far. But that's another little. It's just little games that you play with yourself, I think, and but I think the big, there's like I said, sometimes it's really 3 or 4 things of like get good sleep, eat well, get some exercise.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's all I can do. I used to have a bit about talking about depression, and sort of like for me it comes and goes, which means my sort of like my to-do list is kind of on a sliding scale sometimes of like, I mean, I've opened
Mm.
restaurants and I've made some like short films and I've started other businesses. But like if I'm not doing well, sometimes my to-do list is just like brush your teeth, you fucking asshole.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes I can't even do that. I mean, it sounds extreme, but and I've been fortunate that mine is pretty cyclical and comes and goes. But I do have those. I mean, honestly, my dog Bodie there behind me.
I know. Is that his name, Bowie? I was gonna
Yeah.
ask.
Yeah.
He's
I
a
mean,
black lab.
he's a black lab. He's got an underbite and a little bit of a crooked face. But we go out every morning first thing. So that's every once in a while he'll be over at my folks who live in town. Sometimes they will dog sit if I'm out late or something. And like if he's
Mhm.
not at my house in the morning, it's just a lot harder to get out of bed. So
Yeah.
He's been a big health benefit for me having him. Yeah.
Yeah, because they will let you know if it's breakfast time or dinner time.
Oh yeah.
They will
Oh yeah.
let you know.
Yeah. Which for him is yeah, he will be jumping up here. If I stand up, he will go nuts because it's almost dinner time for him.
It's almost
He'll-
got it. Well, we don't want to delay Bowie's dinner, but I do appreciate you being here. Well, I do appreciate tours on the way, new shows are on the way. I know that that's to come. Anything else that you want to shout out for a moment?
Well, in retrospect of what I said, I'm on Instagram at aaroncharlesfoster.com, and all the links and all the things, just aaronfoster.com can find clips to my stand-up and tour dates and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, very cool. We'll check it all out. Aaron, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Val. Appreciate it.